Welcome to Chitheads from Embodied Philosophy. I'm your host, Jacob Kyle. In each episode of this podcast, I interview a different elder, leader, or teacher from the yoga and wider wisdom community on topics ranging from Eastern philosophy and practices to consciousness studies, social justice, and the human spiritual condition. If you like what you hear, please help us share these teachings with others by leaving us a review on iTunes. And of course, be sure to check out our writings and other educational materials on embodiedphilosophy.com. Thanks so much for listening. Hello, everyone. Before we get into today's interview, I wanted to once again share our newest resource, the Masterclass Collection, which is a digital wisdom library of over 22 talks on Buddhism, the Yoga Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita, featuring scholars, celebrated yoga teachers, and devotional leaders. To browse the collection, just go to fivetattvas.com, fivetattvas.com/masterclass. To receive the 15% discount, especially for our podcast listeners, at checkout, enter the coupon code CHITHEADS15. Each talk is awarded a certain amount of embodied philosophy credits, which count toward our 200-hour wisdom training. You can find more details about that on our website. So let's get into today's interview. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Chitheads. My guest today is Sally Kempton. Sally is a meditation teacher and teacher of spiritual philosophy. She is the author of 2 books, Meditation for the Love of It and Awakening Shakti. She spent 20 years as a Swami in a Vedic tradition and was a close disciple of Swami Muktananda. For 10 years, she wrote a wisdom column for Yoga Journal and regularly offers workshops and trainings domestically and internationally. She also has a constant presence on Yoga Glow where you can find her. So hello, Sally. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Jacob. It's a pleasure.
It's really nice to chat with you. I've really enjoyed reading some of your articles that are on your website. Really beautiful work. You're such a wonderful writer you are. And I wanted to start off just by talking about your own personal story and sort of what led you to the work that you do now.
Well, like many people, I had I would call it a preliminary awakening in my mid-20s. And the experience was of a total opening of the universe to reveal itself as love, which was a very radical experience, as it always is. Mm-hmm. And that started me on a path, which eventually led me to pretty much give myself full time to practice. And I became a student of Swami Muktananda, traveled with him for many years, and then stayed on in the organization. He gave me initiation into sannyasa just before he left his body in 1982. And so I stayed, I taught and ran courses and other programs there for years, and edited a magazine, etc. And then in 2002, after really several years of contemplation about it, I really came to the conclusion that for me to continue my practice in what felt to me like a genuinely realistic, helpful way, I needed to do it without the Swami uniform, without an organization, and to be in the world like the people I was teaching. So I started teaching independently in 2002, and it's been like that ever since. So I am very much, to this day, a student of my teacher, and yet, due to my own spiritual education, my own experience, and of course the experience of living in a rapidly changing world, part of what I've sort of committed myself to doing is to making non-dual teachings as applicable, as practical as they can possibly be, because their life-saving teachings have been for me, and I know for you. And so that's, I would say, that's the life purpose that emerged over the course of this time.
Now, and what's unique about your teachings within kind of the school of Shaivism teachers that are emerging, that a lot of which have been influenced by Muktananda in some way, is that you really emphasize this aspect of Kashmiri Shaivism, or maybe not an aspect, it's just a way of looking at it, that you refer to as the divine feminine. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about what the divine feminine is and how it relates to this tradition of Kashmiri Shaivism.
Okay, beautiful. So in Kashmir Shaivism and of course, in Tantra in general, there's this basic understanding that reality, that divine reality is binary, although utterly non-dual. Mm-hmm. That it has these two qualities: the quality that we could call awareness or chit, and the quality of ananda or love. And this kind of awareness love quality in reality is personified in the understanding of power, of divine power, as feminine. Mm. So Shakti in the tantric tradition, especially in the Shakta tantric tradition, Shakti is understood as both. I'm going to use a word that they don't really use in Shaivism, but I find that it really describes my inner experience. Shakti is the erotic allurement and dynamism at the heart of life. Mm. So in terms of our practical experience, and I say this as a great lover of the divine masculine in the form of Shiva, and a practitioner of pure awareness, but the juice, the love, the power, the dynamism in this universe is Shakti, is feminine essentially. So, and as you know, the Kashmiri Shaiva Tantra has different branches and schools. Yeah. So, and I was trained in the non-dual Shaiva tradition, in which, my guru was a devotee of Shiva in form, as well as Shiva as pure formless consciousness, and he was also a profound exemplar of the divine feminine in the form of Kundalini, and a worshiper of Shakti, but never in form. In other words, there was really in my early years of practice, I had no real exposure to Shakti as goddess, to Shakti as an object of affection. So there was a moment in the early 90s, or maybe the late 80s, when I was involved in a celebration of the Navaratri festival, which is the great goddess festival of India, which we used to do as a huge, kind of big spiritual party in front of a giant statue of the goddess Durga. And I was telling a story, it was one of my teaching functions. And as I started telling the story, which was the story of Sati and Shiva, the romance of Shiva and his first wife, Sati, I just was overwhelmed with ecstasy. I literally felt as though particles of joy were, coming through my crown chakra and expanding my heart and bringing tears to my eyes. And that created a complete sort of revolution in my understanding, especially of the physical world. In other words, a lot of the way that I think many people come to understand the quality of the dynamic Shakti aspect of reality is in nature, so that that we can actually once our eyes have been opened through an inner awakening, we can start to recognize the force of life. In trees, right, in water, in looking into the eyes of another person. In other words, this powerful, dynamic, relational energy that just dances in the physical world. So I began to really examine my life experience, my emotional experience, my meditation experience, my embodied experience, my experience of my own body, mind, as with the understanding that I could look upon them as expressions of Shakti, of goddess. And this is, this was, a lot of this happened through a recognition of the affective power of presencing reality as feminine. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. About 2 days ago, I was talking to a good friend of mine who's going through a very hard time in his life. and had a particularly difficult, emotional blow that day. And I said, well, just feel as though, everything that you're feeling and everything that's coming towards you is arising and subsiding in consciousness. Just feel yourself held in awareness. And he took, listened for a minute, tried it, and said, it's not working. I said, okay. Imagine that you're being surrounded and held in the arms of the Divine Mother. Mm. And he went, oh, okay, that works. And, just in terms of a pragmatic experience of affective, love-infused, non-specific devotion, using devotion in the larger sense of a practice that's infused with love and affection, it's been my experience that considering reality, considering the body, considering the prana, considering the mind as aspects of a divine feminine power that's manifesting as us and as the world is a profound doorway into the experience of love infusing your practice and your life. So I have a kind of pragmatic, I tend to approach sadhana very pragmatically, and in other words, what works to create a sense of freedom and pure awareness that's infused with affection, with tenderness, with sweetness. So that's kind of that's how I got interested in Shakti as my path, because I do think it is. And then a couple of years later, I began teaching courses in goddesses, in the different Hindu goddesses, Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kali, and really entering into the idea of these particular forms of universal energy, how what the energetic feel of Kali is, and how it's different from the energetic field of Lakshmi, and it really started as a kind of I would almost call it, a sorting game, a kind of a paradigm game in which, given the understanding in the Shakta tantras that everything in this universe is an aspect of the divine feminine energy, that there are millions of Shaktis, millions of little energies, little goddesses that are doing everything. I began to see, okay, can I feel what it's like when the Lakshmi energy of beauty and auspiciousness and, sweetness is present in the atmosphere? Can I feel the difference between the love that is part of that field, that let's call her Lakshmi, and the love that's part of the much more intense energetic field that I call Kali? And to recognize that there are these individual vortexes of energy that we call deity, that have that we can discover through mantra, that we can discover through visualization of their iconic forms, but that also are energies in us that move through us, and that actually have a place in our personality, as well as in the weather and in the in the currents of culture, as we are, of course, experiencing in the midst of one. Yes. One very intense cultural upheaval with many, many different aspects to it.
Okay, Sally, I want to rewind for a second and ask you a question, because I want to talk more about this, what you're bringing up regarding the deities. But before we move into that, I want to ask you just to kind of clarify, I think, the difference and specifically what this kind of approach is offering is two questions. The first one is, when you say you are inviting your friend to presence reality as feminine, or you're talking about this story that was related to presencing reality as feminine, what would be the opposite? So if this is sort of a new offering, what would be presencing reality as not feminine or as masculine?
Well, I do think that the foundational tendency or understanding in Buddhism and in Advaita Vedanta, in Shankara Vedanta, in many of the non-dual traditions, is that there is this basic assumption that runs through culture that God is male.
Right.
And of course we understand God is beyond gender. And obviously, when I talk about reality as feminine, I really mean not gendered, but having a particular qualities that, that having the qualities of love and energy rather than simply peace and stillness and, vastness. So I, we're at a moment, of course, we're in a moment where we're in the heart of a social and political revolution involving the lives and the perspectives of the human feminine.
Yeah.
So it has I think it has an enormous resonance to see reality as goddess. But I would say, if it's okay with you for me to talk in these, sort of nakedly idolatrous terms.
Please do.
I really am a, lover of the divine masculine in the form of Shiva and have been for many years. So the recognition that what I love in the Shiva awareness, which is that vast, aware, undifferentiated spaciousness, the freedom and stillness, that what I loved about it was not just its transcendent qualities, but the pulsing excitement at the heart of it. And that's what I came to recognize as goddess, So, in the great tantric statement, without Shakti, Shiva is Shava, is a corpse.
Yeah,
exactly. So that's what I relate to when I think of reality as goddess.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So then my second question was a similar kind of question is, when you say that you approach spirituality in a pragmatic way, what would be some examples of approaching spirituality in a non-pragmatic way? How is that sort of a unique approach to spiritual practice to perceive it as pragmatic ultimately?
Well, I think that most spiritual processes, and I exclude Tantra from this, Tantrikas are, I would say, very, very pragmatic in their approach to spirituality.
Yeah.
But most spiritual traditions, including the one I was trained in, have a couple of approaches to enlightenment or a couple of approaches to state changing, however you describe it. And they're prescribed pretty much for everyone, even though, you might be given your own mantra, but you would not necessarily be given a quiver full of practices that you might want to use in different circumstances. So I would say that many spiritual traditions are, in a certain sense, one size fits all. For example, I have many friends who teach classical, I would call it Neo-Advaita, and teach a practice which I also teach and which I love, where you tune into the awareness of the sensations in your body and the sounds and the thoughts and the breath, and you kind of cycle through awareness of inner and outer objects, and then you tune into the awareness that holds them all. That's a beautiful practice, and very appropriate in certain conditions. But what I've discovered is that in different states and in different situations, it's very important to find a practice, a way of holding yourself, a way of understanding reality that really works in that moment. And, and of course, in the upayas of Shaivism, which is, I think, a great system for understanding why practice might be different, and I know you're very familiar with the upayas, that when you're feeling very, very separate, very much in your individual dualistic understanding, indeed even emotionally upset, you would do exactly what my friend did and try to find something that would make you feel better in that moment.
Right. Yeah.
Or find a way to use the moment to enhance your sense of interiority of everything's happening inside one great heart. That might be the skillful practice. Or the skillful practice might be to sit and do some pranayama and asana and, just kind of get your pranas functioning, or the skillful practice might be substituting a positive thought for a negative thought. But that's what I mean by pragmatic. You're experimental in your practice, and you notice what tends to expand your awareness. Make you more focused when you need it, and more relaxed when you need that. What keeps you feeling the divine nature of your own being, and etc. So, and it's never one size fits all.
Right. And there seems to be like an openness at the very heart of it, because you're not just doing a practice that's sort of been handed down to you in a sort of dogmatic way. This is one size fits all. I'm going to do this, and only this, but rather having kind of an open-ended experimental approach to the practice that takes into consideration, maybe the shifting nature of our embodiment, even. Like sometimes we're going to need different practices given where we're at.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean by pragmatic. It's one of the reasons I love the tantras, because it offers such scope for creatively working with your own mind and your own body and your own prana, and of course tantra is an advanced practice. I mean. Yeah. I came to this after around almost 20 years of practice, and which was mostly mantra practice. So I would say in a certain sense, you kind of have to earn the right to experiment. It doesn't necessarily mean you take 20 years. But,
yeah. Well, but but you're onto something there. When I think that these practices are really the esoteric heart of the whole tradition, and it's for some people it's it's a lot, and so there has to be certain. I think for me, I don't think I would have been ready for these teachings when I first started my own personal practice, and so But moving back to now deity yoga, I wanted to I want to ask you something about when we bring up the notion of the divine feminine, and I sort of understand what you're saying is it's not that it's the divine feminine instead of the divine masculine. There's almost like a mission to kind of extract something that's been a little bit repressed in a certain kind of way. Am I right to
yes.
to catch that? Because
yes.
Especially when you mentioned that the form of the Shakti has not been so much present. We have lots of forms of Shiva, but the forms of the Shakti, when they are considered, they're usually considered just as kind of consorts to the male deities, and not really considered in their own vibratory power or essence. So then have you encountered any resistance to this, to approaching the divine feminine in this way? I mean, I hate to say like sexist responses, but or thinking, oh, that's perfectly fine for females, but
for women,
for
right?
Women. And how do you respond to that when you encounter that kind of resistance?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the most resistance that I receive for this viewpoint is from the so-called non-dual community.
Right.
The students of Adya and Rupert Spira, both of whom are teachers I love and admire. So this is not in any way a critique of them. But there's an idea in especially in my neighborhood in the Bay Area, where you pretty much can't shake a stick without running into a non-dual practitioner or someone who regards themselves as a Ramana Maharshi style non-dual practitioner. So they get very insulted at the idea that there is masculine and feminine, that there are masculine and feminine currents in a non-dual reality. In other words, they can't accept the tantric secret that even in the non-dual there's movement.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, I think that's it's a paradigm issue, that. So, and I would say it has not been my experience with people who really have incarnated, who really embody the non-dual enlightenment, the classical Ramana Maharshi style non-dual enlightenment, they get it, as Ramana did.
Yeah.
I mean, Ramana was a great lover. So yes to that. Secondly, most of my workshops and most of my programs are, most of my students are women. And most of the men who study with me are, they tend to be men who are obviously open to the idea of the divine feminine, often, in trying to find their own relationships to the feminine inside themselves. So I don't get that kind of pushback in programs where people have signed up to study with me.
Right.
I would say that the main pushback that I get, and that I think anybody who works in the field of non-dual awareness and also in the field of deity practice, is a resistance to the idea of deity or a personal divinity.
Yeah.
Or as Ken Wilber says, the second person spirit. That there's, we're all kind of postmodern and post-religious, most of us. So, and deity just sounds so religious,
Yes.
and also Hindu, which is not the most fashionable spiritual path in the West.
So this is so fascinating. This is what I really love this topic, and so let's go into that then. So what you're offering, it seems to me, is that maybe this kind of understanding of deity, and sort of looking at deity in the terms of our own kind of religious baggage is problematic. Right. So what is the more radical way or the alternative way of understanding deity that kind of surpasses or transcends this these religious samskaras?
Okay, beautiful question. So I would take it in stages. So at one level, at the level of practice, that deity yoga as it's practiced, for instance, in Tibetan Buddhism, which, as I'm sure you know, they have a very sophisticated tantric deity practice, probably the one most familiar to Westerners, that the idea is that you take on a deity, you take on a personal deity as you would take on a mantra, often for a particular period in your life, maybe not permanently, but and your practice is and I do think this is the essence of Tantra. You bring the deity into your meditation for several purposes. One, because as human beings, personal connection, love and devotion. It's very, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, it's very hard for someone who loves the unmanifest to actually experience devotion. So a deity is like a focal point for your feelings of personal affection and everything that goes with it, including, feeling that there's I call it the invisible friend kind of deity practice. But more important is that when you meditate on a divine form and bring it into your body and bring it into your awareness, it literally cooks your awareness. And it begins to allow you to embody the qualities of that particular deity energy. And I do think that that's what makes deity practice so skillful. It literally purifies your inner field and divinizes your subtle body in very, very powerful ways. So, just as a pragmatic practice, it's very significant for many people. Now, in terms of metaphysics, at least my understanding of the way that the tantric Buddhists, as well as Hindus, as well as Taoists, and in fact, as not unlike some of the teachings in Christian and Jewish metaphysics, is that there are very much levels of subtle reality that we don't see. So, and of course, in Kashmir Shaivism, there's the Tattva teaching actually locates deities in certain tattvas above Maya and certain tattvas below Maya, and so essentially, the way I experience it is that when I really tune into a deity energy, when I make that the deity practice a part of my daily meditation practice, that I more and more become aware of the presence of this kind of energy vortex, I call it, that's in the field, and that, along with all the other energy vortexes in the noosphere, the energy vortex that's connected to a particular invocational or mantric or visualization of a deity has very distinct qualities, and can actually, once you have mastered it, the contemplation can actually take you into a much higher tattva than you are ordinarily experience through that connection.
So the deities, the images of the deities are sort of pragmatic tools to help you cultivate a relationship with what is at heart an energetic quality. Is that essentially it?
Yes, and ultimately a doorway into the absolute. So I mean, you can approach deity as, for example, as you approach mantra.
Yeah.
You can approach it at whatever level you find yourself in. And if you're a devotional person who comes out of a religious tradition and you've been schooled, for example, in loving Christ, then there would be a natural affinity for that particular vortex, the Christ consciousness vortex, which is, one of the more powerful, uplifting energies in the planet. But that Christ energy, if you really give yourself to it, it's going to melt. It's going to create a samavesha, a melting into the subtler and subtler layers of it, and you'll find yourself in a state of radical divine communion. And the goddesses, especially what I call the higher goddesses, the goddesses, who exist who are outside Maya, beyond Maya, they are open doorways into the divine I-ness, the divine awareness. And Shakti, as they say in the Tantras, takes you to Shiva. So, through the form, you really enter into the formless. But in my experience, in a very, very juicy and bliss-focused way, and I admit freely to being a bliss freak.
So. That's great. I love that. A bliss freak. So let's go. I would love for you, if you don't mind, to share maybe a deity yoga practice. So maybe pick a particular deity and what would be involved in this kind of practice. Does it include the mantra of the deity? Does it include imagery that you would focus on, visualize? And then my follow-up question after that, I'll just mention it now, is I'm asking this actually for personal reasons. If I'm initiated into a mantra, how do I adopt this kind of a practice without it conflicting with my own kind of mantra practice?
That is a really good question. I would say it would depend on, if you're practicing with a goddess bij mantra, for instance, then you would add the visualization and the invocation to that. And the other way to practice is to create a period in your practice, or a period in your day where you actually experiment and play with goddess energy. So let's say you want to practice with the goddess Durga. Which many women especially like to do because she's very empowering. So what you would do is find a form that can be the focal point, which could be a statue or a crystal or a picture. I generally find that if you're up for it, that the iconographic pictures are if you have to find the right one, or a yantra, which for many people is preferable. For instance, I've been for a few years doing a Lalita Tripura Sundari practice, and with a Meru yantra, with a three-dimensional yantra, Sri Chakra yantra, and I've never had an actual form of her that looks that looks like a woman. It's been a completely abstract practice, and I practice with her mantra, and I do it at the beginning of my meditation, so that I do a little puja, And then I spend 15 or 20 minutes practicing with the mantra, sometimes chanting, practicing a chant that invokes her, the Lalita Trishati or the Lalita Sahasranam. And then I meditate in the way I'm meditating, which would, if you're doing a strong mantra practice, it would mean practicing with your mantra, and you'd have to experiment with it.
So with the focusing with the yantra, and you said you have a 3-dimensional yantra, could you speak a little bit about that practice? Are you focusing on a particular point in the yantra? Are you sort of loosely gazing at it? Like, what is that? How do you include that in your practice?
Well, as you probably know, there are many different ways to do it. One, there's a with that particular yantra, and I suspect with others, there's a very formal practice, which includes ritual, where you presence the different aspects of the yantra. The Sri Chakra has a series of triangles in different configurations, inside circles and inside squares and with petals. So you actually, in the traditional practice, you move from the outside to the inside to the heart, and then you meditate on the bindu, the point in the middle of it. I basically meditate on the bindu. And I use it more as a focal point for puja than as a meditative focal point. But what I've found is that when you do the puja and connect to the energy of the yantra, which you do over time, by just having it in your field and gazing at it in different ways, that the initial practice of tuning into the yantra will set you in a particular felt sense that in this particular case, in the case of this practice, my inner experience of the goddess Lalita Tripura Sundari is not so much, although it has happened, of her, her goddess form, her lady form, but more of a particular light that comes into my subtle body and that I meditate in, and a felt sense of very blissful vibratory energy. And then eventually what happens is with the mantra, I kind of fall into the Madhyanadi, into the central channel, and then meditation opens up, and it becomes the natural meditation process that you're not orchestrating.
That's beautiful.
And I think you can do this with any deity, any goddess, feminine or masculine, any form.
That's beautiful. There's so much there we could go into, but I'm trying to be economical with time. So I want to talk a little bit now about the divine. We've talked a little bit about our troubling times, and the way that you're talking about the Shakti energies. There's a way in which or maybe I read it this way, but it seemed like you were implying that different periods have a certain quality that reflects a certain deity. So if we were to describe our current situation in terms of the kind of deity qualities, what would you say is the kind of reigning Shakti at the moment?
Well, I would say we're definitely in the Asuric realms. I mean, this is one of those moments when, when the Asuras have thrown the Devas out of their heaven realm, and they're starting their big-footed takeover. So, and traditionally, I actually think it's kind of a classic situation.
Yeah.
And
talk about that, because I think that's going to be comforting for some people. If it's classic, it's like, okay, so we've been here before.
Right. This has happened before.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. So, in Indian mythology, which is very much a mythology of cycles. I mean, it's like Taoism. There's the understanding that there's the time has cycles, and that light times and dark times more or less interface and often succeed each other. And as you know, one of the staples of goddess mythology, especially, but also of Krishna mythology and Shiva mythology, is that these incredibly powerful demons gain a kind of a siddhi, a supernatural power that makes them invincible, and then they conquer light forces, and the light forces are wandering in darkness. Uh, and then they, somehow someone points them to the divine, and and usually in the most famous stories, they're pointed towards the goddess Durga, who, and this is, I think, a very significant part of what it is to be a lover of Shakti, that in these stories, Durga is hidden. She's in the mountains. Nobody sees her. She's very hard to find. So the gods have to make a pilgrimage, and they have to petition and pray, and eventually she appears and agrees to use the gods' own weapons to defeat the demons. And that cycle has been, as you know, it's been part of Indian mythology, and of course hero mythology in all cultures. But the essence of the hero's journey and the heroine's journey is that moment when the dark forces seem to have won, and the balance in the universe seems to have been destroyed. And then we have to have the skill both to prepare and to wait for the time, because it's obviously this is not the time, right? This is the moment to hang back and wait. And I was thinking this morning that it's a little bit like, if you know the Mahabharata, it's a little bit like that moment when Yudhishthira has lost the dice game to his evil cousin, and the Pandavas are exiled to the forest, and and for 13 years they actually do sadhana, they do practice, and collect their strength, and enlist alliances, and then after 13 years they fight the battle. And that so much of that section of the Mahabharata is about stability and and learning how to cultivate themselves on a deeper level, and working with their frustration. So I do think that it's that kind of time. And that the time will change, and that hopefully, to speak in political terms, I'm a veteran of the very similar situation in 1968. So having been through 1968 and that moment, the 68, 69, 1970 was a pivotal moment for me, because it was really in those years that I started on the spiritual path. That was my reaction to what seemed like a terrible disaster at the time. Yeah. It seems like we'd be almost grateful for Nixon now, but be that as it may. But for a lot of people in my generation, it was, they interpreted it as a sign that they should, increase revolutionary activity, often violent revolutionary activity, and that was clearly not an effective tactic. Yeah. And actually created a lot more problems for the progressive movement than it helped. So I just hope that, I love the commitment to activism that we're seeing now. I think it's fantastic, and we must become activists, but skillful. Yeah. Like it's, so
it seems like it has to be, it has to be grounded in wisdom, it seems.
It does. It has to be grounded in wisdom, and it requires a certain tactical maturity. It's not about emotional demonstrations.
Totally.
Even though there is something about letting the world know how you feel about it that's useful. Yeah. But
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all I wanted to say. Yeah. The other thing that really I really felt in this election season, because I'm a great lover of the Spandakarikas, the verses on vibration, which essentially are about the way the currents of energy will either liberate us or take us further into bondage, and that so much of sadhana is about recognizing the nature of energy in the field and learning how to work with it and ride it. And it became clear at a certain point that the spanda in this particular election was off the charts, crazy, and that that there was no way of working with it oppositionally. That for a practitioner, riding it, and riding the emotions into the heart at this point, assuming that I wish more of us had gotten out and voted, but be that as it may, riding those emotions into the heart, is a skillful way of working with very difficult and dark emotions. And when you do that, then your insight about what to do in the physical world becomes much more empowered and wise and smart.
Yeah. So there's a way. So what I hear you saying is that, and this is sort of something that I found also in one of your articles. You talk about terror, lust, anger, and sadness can be ladders to transcendence. So what I hear you saying when you're talking about riding the wave of the spanda of this election into the heart is that contrary to a kind of rejection, people who want to turn it off and shut it out in order to ride to the heart. You're saying quite the opposite. It's like face it and actually the kind of the horrifying, the horribleness of what we're perceiving actually itself can be a track to the heart. Can you explain a little bit more about what that means and how that works?
Well, I would say that this is the razor's edge of Tantra. Mm-hmm. It is this recognition, which is in two of the really foundational texts of Kashmir Shaiva Tantra, as I'm sure you know, mm-hmm. that at the heart of intense emotions and intense situations is a particularly concentrated quality of Shakti, which, if we can bring our attention away from what's going on of the external manifestations of it and really tune into the originating force, that force will actually in that moment make us aware of the truth about ourselves, which is undiluted, unadulterated Shakti vibration, love energy, which has an innate creativity that allows situations to shift and change consciously, mm-hmm. because you've gone to the root. You're not at the. It's like the, and it's such a foundational principle of all spiritual traditions, is that if you go, let yourself focus on the goals that the senses have in mind, you're just endlessly driven into, whatever your reactivity may be, whether it's, greed, desire, anger, endlessly acting itself out. Whereas if you turn into the source of it, you discover that the source is really the divine energy that we call Spanda Shakti, the vibrating fountain of power and love. Yeah. And then, so I think the key here is also recognizing that you're not trying to fix it. You're not trying to get rid of your anger or get rid of your sadness. You're actually going to the heart of it and finding that truth that at the heart of everything is divine energy. Mm. And I think that for there are many tantric practices to help you feel better, when you're angry or sad. But this practice asks you to really have a powerful, focused, disciplined intent to find the divine heart of even the most negative and difficult feelings. And it's deeply transformative, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, it's really a very radical, and I think it's getting more airtime, so to speak, in contrast to the kind of maybe trajectory of practice that would deny the utility of these, quote unquote, negative emotions. And what I love about the tantric path and what you're offering is that we can't say this is divine and that's not divine. Everything is sort of a gateway when it's understood with wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. And and it's very radical, and it demands that you work with your own preferences.
Yeah.
In with a lot of renunciation. So it's not as some people think. It's not a practice for letting emotions rip or following every desire. It's really a practice of deep refinement that leads to a deep refinement of emotions and desires.
Yeah.
But in a way that doesn't make good and bad kind of. It doesn't ask you to reject yourself and others,
Right.
On the grounds of preference.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's, as you know, this is a big conversation that is one always has to have in discussing these teachings, which is that it's not about excusing evil.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's about it's a really important point. It's because it's very hard for people who are dedicated to the true, the good, and the beautiful, to deal with a philosophy that seems to be excusing evil.
Yeah.
But it's really about transcending and including evil in a way that allows you to function, at your best, at your goodest, truest, and beautifulest, while having a genuinely non-dual view. It's not. I'm a great admirer of Joanna Macy, who's, I think, she's a wonderful example of a Buddhist activist who has a strongly non-dual view and yet is completely committed to social action and environmental action. And she said something, I think, quoting another environmentalist. She said, "It's not that we're trying to, it's not that we're working to save the rainforest. It's that the rainforest is working through us to save itself."
I love that.
Isn't that beautiful?
That's so beautiful.
Yeah. And I that understanding just changes the whole frame.
Yeah, it really does. Wow. That's I feel like we're just getting started, but I feel like that's a beautiful note to end on, even though I would love to talk to you for another hour. So we'll have to do this again. I'll have to have you back to talk more because I have like 5 more questions I wanted to get to. But this has been a really beautiful conversation, Sally. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
My pleasure, Jacob. It's a lot of fun.
I'm glad you had fun. Me too. I want to give you an opportunity now just to maybe share a little bit of any projects that are coming up, your website where people can find you, any workshops that you might be having, anything like that.
Yes. My website is sallykempton.com, and it's got a lot of articles and my schedule and a lot of interviews, etc. I teach a lot on teleconferences, and I'm starting a new teleconference on the Bhagavad Gita, which is called The Surrendered Life, and it's a non-dual examination of the Bhagavad Gita. Starts on January 10th and runs for 6 weeks with lectures, a lot of audio meditations, group work, etc. It's a pretty full program that you can do at home in your jammies.
Very nice.
What else? I'm teaching a workshop at Esalen on the Vijnana Bhairava in early March.
Amazing.
And I'll be teaching a 5-day at Kripalu and a weekend at Kripalu in August. And I just decided to teach a meditation teacher training and we're going to have it at the first one at Mount Madonna on for 5 days between May 28th and June 2nd. So
lots of great things coming up.
Lots of stuff, yeah. And I also, those of you who are interested in deity practice and goddess practice might be interested in Awakening Shakti, which is published by Sounds True and is available at Sounds True and on Amazon. And my meditation book, which is called Meditation for the Love of It, that is kind of the unpacking of the approach to meditation that we were talking about earlier and how you apply it.
Beautiful. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to put all of those wonderful things in the show notes, and so people can get in touch with you and maybe go to and attend one of these events. So thank you so much, Sally. It's been such a pleasure. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll speak to you soon.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jacob.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it, friends. That was Sally Kempton. I hope you enjoyed that interview. To find out more about Sally and her teachings, check out